Hey everyone, welcome to another game review. In my last one, I talked about Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal for an absurd length. Needless to say, I think that game is the absolute apex of the Ratchet series, and was the perfect finale after the crescendo of quality the series went through. It started out great, but with plenty of room to improve in the first game, then graduated to excellence in going commando, yet still had a few kinks to iron out here and there. Up Your Arsenal managed to outdo both, and it's an extremely hard game to criticize because it's just that good. While going commando seems to be gaining more popularity as the years pass, Up Your Arsenal was consistently rated as the series' magnum opus and became one of its best sellers. The series would undoubtedly continue, the question was when and how. By this point, it had been 2 years since the series' debut, and it had already grown and matured so much. Insomniac essentially perfected the formula in the third game, so the well of things they could do was essentially dry. If they just kept recycling the third game over and over like some other series do, it would get rather stale pretty quickly. One option would be to wait for the next generation of hardware, which could give their game some instant next generation appeal, but the PS3 was still several years away, so it would be an immense financial risk to wait that long. This is a problem faced by many video game series. As I said in the last video, it's often pretty clear how to progress from each game in a trilogy to the next, and ideally the third game would mark the formula being perfected. Obviously, one option would be to end the series there and move on to something else, but coming up with new IPs sure isn't easy. I mean, it was a struggle coming up with the titles for these reviews, so you can only imagine how hard it is to envision a whole universe, cast of characters, etc. for an all-new video game IP. So most companies choose to continue the series past the third game, which is when they run into a unique problem. How do we continue to keep this series fresh and not fall into the trap of recycling the same game over and over? Insomniac ran into this problem when thinking of ideas for a sequel to Ratchet 3. In the end, they decided to make some changes to the formula so this new game would stand out, which eventually led to Ratchet Deadlocked, released in 2005. Personally, I played this game shortly following its predecessors. By then, I was a certified fan of the series. Ratchet 1 was flawed but still enjoyable, Ratchet 2 really convinced me of how good the series was, and Ratchet 3 fully solidified its greatness for me. I obviously wanted more, but at that time the only other game I owned was size matters, but that's a story for the next video. Also, yes, I did get a new computer desk during the production of this video. Thanks for noticing. I didn't own a copy of Deadlocked, so that spring I picked it up and played it for myself. While it wasn't quite as good as Ratchet 2, and especially Ratchet 3, I rather enjoyed the playthrough even with the changes they made. It was another really good Ratchet & Clank game to add to the list. Even though some people tend to overlook it these days, I think it's a worthy entry in its own right, and today I'm here to tell you why. Enough talk, let's dive right in. Ratchet Deadlocked takes place 1 year after the events of Up Your Arsenal. I've sort of implied this, but yeah, every game actually takes place a year after the last one. That's great attention to detail, but I won't give you my spiel about that since I already discussed it in the last video. The game opens up in the live broadcast of a combat sport called Dread Zone, and we see Captain Starshield get obliterated by Ace Hardlight, the champion of the sport. This establishes the main focus of the game's story. It revolves around Dread Zone, the illegal combat sport that's held within the lawless shadow sector of the Solana Galaxy, organized by underground media mogul Gleeman Vox. They search the galaxy for heroes, capture them, and force them to compete in the fighting for the sake of ratings and such. Anyways, as soon as it's introduced, we cut to the starship Phoenix. I'll bet you can guess where this is going. Following the defeat of Nefarious and at the end of the Galactic War, Sasha became the mayor of Metropolis on Kurwan, and Ratchet was promoted to the captain of the Phoenix in Q-Force. Sasha says that Captain Starshield, who had been missing for months at that point, was killed on Dread Zone, and mentions how reports of heroes disappearing have been on the rise. Suddenly, the transmission cuts out, and the Phoenix is invaded by Dread Zone staff who take Ratchet, Clank, and Al hostage. Turns out, saving the galaxy from Nefarious has earned them quite a bit of fame, more than they already had, enough to catch the attention of Vox and make him and his friends perfect targets for Dread Zone to take in. Vox tells his men to give the trio of heroes collars, and they're forced to work for Dread Zone and prepare Ratchet to fight against the other exterminators. Ratchet wakes up to Al preparing a new suit of armor for him, fixing up his visual matrix processor and enabling his speech function. As he's doing this, we get this funny moment.
Okay, now to activate your speech function. Me out of this thing, you blarg-headed frack monkey! I can barely breathe and my tail feels like it's shoved right up my... There seems to be a problem with the speech circuitry. I'll take a look at it later.
And he teleports Ratchet into the qualification course. This serves as the tutorial level, obviously, and as you go through it, Vox gives us the rundown of how this whole Dread Zone thing works. All contestants have collars that can administer an electric shock.
Observe.
I hate this job.
And if a contestant is uncooperative, or even worse, boring, their head can be blown up with the push of a button. The contestant must battle through the Dread Zone circuit to rise up the ranks and eventually earn a chance for freedom. Obviously, Ratchet is now one of these contestants and must face off against Dread Zone's gladiators, now accompanied by the two combat bots named Merc and Green, making up Team Darkstar. This setup is pretty simple, but it effectively motivates everything that happens in the game. Sure, maybe the threat of death can be argued as a cheap way to get stakes in the plot, but when the story is otherwise written as well as it is here in Deadlocked, does that even matter? I would argue that that this game has the same strengths as all the previous ones when it comes to its storytelling. The cutscene animation is as awesome as ever, and the voice acting is just as well done as before. I will admit, not as much happens in this game as the others, in terms of plot twists and whatnot. However, it isn't entirely flat, and does still have a few twists and turns that keep it from running stale. In fact, I'd argue this game features some of the series' strongest cutscenes and story moments, which we'll get into later. This game is also remembered because of its darker tone. That isn't to say the previous games were completely lacking in tension or more serious story elements, but Deadlocked takes that to its logical extreme. I mean, the whole premise is based around heroes being taken hostage and forced to compete to the death on live holovision. Later on, the stakes raise even further as the situation the heroes are in gets more and more dire. Basically, some really serious shit happens. This is by far the most hardcore Ratchet & Clank game ever made. I mean, even looking at the title implies this. It's simply Ratchet Deadlocked, not Ratchet & Clank Deadlocked. Immediately, you can tell things are going to be pretty different. Personally, I don't really mind this at all. This is no Shadow the Hedgehog situation, where the game forces a dark tone in the most try-hard, immature, edgy way possible for the sake of a cheap marketing gimmick to chase trends. It's no secret that video games were trending towards more mature shooters such as Halo, as players who grew up playing games were growing older, so in the mid-2000s, many developers made their games to capitalize on this. In the case of something like Shadow, the new direction felt incredibly forced, which actively clashed with nearly 15 years of storytelling. In Ratchet Deadlocked, however, the devs put in an extensive amount of effort to maintain continuity, as well as the same appeal the previous games had, just with higher stakes in the plot. Ratchet Deadlocked has the same witty sense of humor that defined the stories of the previous games. It's once again based around satire of the world we live in. As opposed to Ratchet 3, where the satire primarily focused on pop culture, Deadlocked returns to making fun of capitalism and corporations, though it still features themes of heroes and the facade they may have that were present in the last game. People like Ace Hardlight are superficially popular through branding that makes them seem strong and heroic, when in actuality they're washed-up has-beens. Ace's life has been essentially ruined by Gleam and Vox's marketing, as he's forced to be a figurehead for Dreadzone when no one actually likes him. Vox also tries to push Ace's popularity by essentially slandering Ratchet. More than once, you see the announcers Dallas and Juanita claiming Ratchet is some villain that committed heinous crimes, even calling him the Butcher of Bogon.
This year's contestants include the notorious mafia crime boss known as Ratchet, seen here at his Makhtar estate.
And to think that other networks actually call him a hero.
It's truly sad, Dallas.
After making his fortune selling cigarettes to children, Ratchet went on to pilot a tanker ship for Zexon.
A week later, Ratchet got drunk and crashed his tanker into the ocean world of Equados. Who can forget these graphic images of baby seals smothered in radioactive waste?
Known for his exploits in organized crime, his dabbling in the occult, and his hatred of sunshine, puppies, and chocolates, here's Ratchet!
He's also always trying to shove Ace's merch down kids' throats, but they completely ignore him, because they all think Ratchet is the cool one. Speaking of Gleam and Vox, he's the physical manifestation of corporate greed, and the ultimate final boss of everything the series' satire has stood for up to now. In my opinion, Vox is one of the series' best bad guys, along with Nefarious and Drek. This guy embodies every negative stereotype of greedy, slimy business owners. He treats his employees like absolute trash, only cares about his media empire's TV ratings, and everything he does is motivated by the bottom line. Vox is the kind of guy that will do anything to keep those ratings up, which is why his holovision network is entirely focused around making heroes fight and kill each other against their will. The satire at the expense of big media corporations they're able to wring out of this guy is plainly incredible, and he's involved in numerous cutscenes throughout the game that made me chuckle out loud.
Something you should know. I'm not a real tyrannoid.
Will you lose your lunch if you have to watch one more reality dating show? Is your blogs gone wild, video scratched from overuse? Then it's time to turn that dial to something a little more dangerous. Time for some real action. It's time to blow it up!
As I said, despite the game's shift in tone, it carries over the wit and charm that the other games had. I suppose the satire is somewhat more cynical than it previously was, but honestly not by that much. As you saw, the game still has heavy focus on the comedic aspects, and I personally think it's just as funny as the previous games. Yeah, Up Your Arsenal overall made me laugh harder and more frequently, but Deadlock's cutscenes are well within the series' comedic quality standards. Hell, even the dialogue from the announcers can get a chuckle out of me, even if they tend to repeat the same lines over and over.
Have you ever seen the Diablo in the pale moonlight? I have, and it's fantastic!
The more hardcore nature of Deadlocked is reflected in its aesthetics. It has the same general visual appeal as its predecessors, but the environments are darker and more grungy on the whole. These places look appropriately abandoned, given that the game takes place in a lawless fringe sector of the galaxy. It's almost the ghetto or Chicago of Solana or something. Dreadzone just took these long abandoned places and converted them into combat arenas with no regard for the safety of the contestants, because after all, the more dangerous the situation, the better the ratings, right? Even though the colors are generally less vibrant, I really don't mind because of how well it fits, and I don't think that makes the game ugly or whatever. I especially like the idea of Catacrom 4, a zombie-infested graveyard planet, and the returning Orxon, the old Blargian homeworld that appears even more lifeless, the crust of which is now being mined for raritanium. And it's not like the visuals themselves aren't impressive for the system either. If you ask me, Ratchet Deadlocked has some of the highest fidelity graphics on the PS2, due in large part to its late life release date. By the fourth game, Insomniac had really mastered the PS2 hardware, and it shows. What started as a series with 480i only and no widescreen now has weather effects that look like this. Yeah, that snow or sandstorm can pass as an early 7th gen effect, it looks so good. That said, the game has some odd jank with the visuals for whatever reason. It obviously has 480p and widescreen, but it's really finicky. For all the other games, switching to progressive mode worked out fine with my setup, but when I enabled it in Deadlocked, this happened. Yeah, that really annoyed me since I had to stop recording and restart my capture card, but thankfully that was the last of these issues regarding the resolution. Though on the subject of weird jank, when I got to Stygia, the game just crashed on me. I even reset the console to check, and yeah, I pulled the same shit twice. Thankfully, switching over to my other PS2 allowed me to play the rest of the game, so it's because of that I was able to make this review. It's fucking weird since my Ratchet 1 disc looks like this, and even runs better on this Slim, with the music actually being able to fully loop. You know, I don't understand why disc games are so fucking weird, and I don't think I ever will. But yeah, this game looks appealing even if the aesthetic it goes for is a lot darker than before. The music also reflects the tone of the game. As established, it takes place on an extreme reality TV show, so the soundtrack is themed around that. Ratchet Deadlocked primarily goes all in on a heavily rock and metal inspired direction. It features songs with powerful drums and guitars. It maintains the sample mixing that the previous games in the series made use of, but with more of an edge and punch to it. This kind of music is right up my alley, and if you remember, is one of the main reasons Adventure is my favorite era of Sonic music. There I go, my controversial Sonic opinions again. I shouldn't be allowed to make videos. This soundtrack kicks ass, perfectly fits the premise of Dreadzone, and has a distinct personality that hasn't been seen anywhere else in the series. I mean, just take a listen to these badass tracks. In addition, some songs also have some real emotion. Most will hype you up to kick some gladiator ass, but there is that one every now and then that goes in a different direction. For example, the theme for the Dread Station hub is full of intimidating synths that sell how dire Team Darkstar's situation is. However, the most notable case of this is for the last mission of the Ghost Station, Escape. That's some good stuff. It's a song that truly reflects the desperate situation the heroes are in, and actually has an air of reflection to it. After coming this far with all the things Ratchet and friends have gone through, their lives are at stake because some greedy bastard got overzealous and wanted to make some extra money. Ratchet isn't about to die to something like that, so now it's an all-out rush to escape the clutches of Dreadzone, freeing all the other heroes they're holding captive, and destroying it so it can never be used again while they're at it. It's great stuff. I really have nothing more to add. This game is top-notch visually and musically. The weapons in Ratchet Deadlocked are done a little bit differently differently from before. I personally thought the weapons improved with each entry in the series. In Ratchet 1, the weapons that allowed for taking out enemies from far away, such as the Blaster or Devastator, were the most useful, because of the lack of strafing and more defensive combat system. Ratchet 2 introduced weapon level ups into the mix and a more close quarters combat system, and Ratchet 3 expanded upon this with the 5 version upgrades and the most balanced roster yet. In my last review, I said Ratchet 3's weapon system was the best in the series, and I do stand by its roster and systems being incredible. However, after revisiting this game, I think I jumped the gun a little bit. In terms of weapon balance and systems, Ratchet Deadlocked is probably the overall most refined so far. The ideas and refinements it introduces may appear simple on the surface, but in practice it leads to the most well-rounded arsenal in the series yet. I will concede that the roster isn't nearly as varied as before. I mean, there's literally only 10 weapons in the game, and a lot of them take on the same archetypes from the previous titles. This would be a major downside if the weapons weren't good to use, but that's not the case, and the roster is well within the series' usual quality standard. The amount of damage dealt is appropriate, and the sound design is satisfactory, two things essential for weapons being good in a Ratchet & Clank game. I especially like the Magma Cannon, a simple shotgun weapon, the Hunter Mine Launcher, which allows you to place down bombs that automatically track down enemies, the Dual Vipers, a pair of pistols that look plainly badass, you can even shoot them on rails too, which is double cool points, the Arbiter, an effective rocket launcher, and the Scorpion Flail, a melee weapon that's pure satisfaction to use. This game also has the mini turrets, which are as beneficial as ever. I basically named every weapon I used in this game because really they're all useful in their own ways. It's easily the most balanced set of weapons the series has seen yet, and I found each one to have their own application and a mostly even distribution of situations. But the fun doesn't stop there. This game also expands upon the weapon upgrade system, introducing Going Commando and refining up your arsenal. Ratchet 2 only allowed you to upgrade your weapons once, immediately changing to its fully powered form, while Ratchet 3 made it so you can upgrade them to level 5, thereby making the level ups feel a lot better paced. Deadlock further ups the ante by letting you upgrade them to level 10, meaning the level ups come even more frequently. As I was playing, I would pretty much always earn 2 or more upgrades per stage. To some, this may sound like it trivializes the level ups since they happen more often and feel like you put less work in to unlock them, but I don't see it this way at all. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing that upgrade screen appear, informing you that you can cause even more havoc and destruction. Yeah, I know that's a point I brought up in the last review, but it's true, doubly so here. Reaching max level once again fully morphs the weapon into its final form, which like the previous games is a great reinforcement for engaging with the game's mechanics. There I go mentioning that gameplay loop again, that I can't shut up about. In addition, Ratchet Deadlocked includes a more fleshed out weapon mod system. Going Commando had mods you can buy with Veritanium, but this system was pretty basic and didn't allow for much customization. Here in Deadlocked though, it takes it a step further. There's 2 types of mods, Alpha and Omega. You can purchase both, but Alpha mods can also be unlocked with level ups. The Alpha mods are pretty standard stuff like additional ammo, a faster rate of fire, more knockback, and more, whereas Omega mods allow for things like acid that gradually inflicts damage on the enemies you shoot, napalm blasts that burn anything they touch, or spawning a crowd of bouncer-like balls of destruction. Your weapons can only have one of each mod equipped, which incentivizes experimentation to figure out your ideal loadout, almost like the badge system for Paper Mario. If I had to nitpick, it would have been cool if you could mix and match a couple Omega mods to create interesting effects, but the system we already have is quite fun to mess around with and adds an extra layer of depth and customization to your arsenal. Those things aren't the only things Deadlock changes, however. Like I said earlier, Insomniac made some alterations to the Ratchet & Clank formula in this game. The most immediately noticeable of these is the lack of clank on your back. Sure, you could argue this limits your movement options, but you still have the charger boots to get around quicker, and it also means you don't have to slog through boring Clank sections. Even if you did have Clank with you though, he wouldn't be really all that helpful. I think you know where I'm going with this. The previous games weren't just third-person shooters, they also had elements of platforming and acrobatics alongside that. That said, they were trending in a more shooter-oriented direction with each passing sequel. Going Commando was already more focused on combat than the first game because of its control overhauls like adding a reliable strafe, and Up Your Arsenal took it even further in that regard. Ratchet Deadlock continues this trend and basically goes full-on third-person shooter. That isn't to say the game is absolutely devoid of platforming of any sort. The arena tournaments feature a few time jumps between flipping platforms, and there's still the swing shot, but these elements are either pretty basic or rather understated in most cases. Deadlocked essentially takes the arena battles from the last 2 games and expands them into a full-length game. Most of the planets you visit see you completing about 4 or 5 missions, complete with bolt rewards, or dread points if you're doing optional challenges. It also carries over the quality of life improvements from Ratchet 3, such as the different control options, the ability to buy all ammo at once, multiple quick select rings, and more. Merc and Green also help you out, killing enemies and performing tasks like turning bolt cranks for you, or throwing EMP blasts to disable turrets and the like. In general, it's incredibly optimized for combat and shooting, as that's the main focus of the game. With how much I love the previous games, some may assume I feel absolutely betrayed by this, but that's incredibly far from the truth. truth. I don't think Ratchet games should always lean as far into pure combat as Deadlock does, but for just one game, I think it's an interesting change of pace that offers fun in its own right. Sure, not my preference, but as I've argued more than once by now, I don't need everything to perfectly fit my exact preference to a T to be good. It's of much more value to examine games based on how well they execute their ideas, and not on preconceived notions of how something should be. The problems with both sides of Sonic discourse in a nutshell. Anyways, I think Ratchet Deadlocked is a solidly executed game itself, and worthy of praise alongside its predecessors. I've always considered the combat one of the strongest elements of these games, and I thought the arena battles from Ratchet 2 and 3 were great. So a whole game built around those things is a pretty logical thing to do. I also think the combat bots are a welcome addition, as they make the game feel less lonely and automate a lot of the more slow elements. They can occasionally have glitches in their AI, but this is infrequent and easily fixable with the regroup command. I don't really know what else to say. Shooting enemies remains as enjoyable as ever. The weapon modding system adds a respectable degree of depth. All in all, this is a really good game to play. It's made even more fun with the extras they added, which you can unlock with skill points. These things have essentially been reworked into collectibles of sorts, and replaced the giant bolts from previous games. I didn't really mention them in the last 2 reviews because, well, there wasn't really anything to say, but in this game, like I said, it's expanded upon. Earning more of them nets you various unlockables in the pause menu, including player skins and the ability to change the color of the HUD. I changed it to blue to match my channel's primary color. There's all sorts of skins for Ratchet, the funniest of which being Alpha Clank, because I mean, just look at this. Look at it. It's genius. Although I wonder what Sigma Clank would look like. And I wonder why Insomniac hasn't hired me yet. Deadlock just seems like a game where customization is a major focus, with these and the weapon mod system, and I love that. However, no game is perfect, and Ratchet Deadlocked has a few things that aren't my favorite. Unlike its predecessors, the game has a difficulty select with 5 levels. Couch Potato, really funny guys, Contestant, Gladiator, Hero, and Exterminator. I went with Contestant since that's just what I've always played on, and it's the one that's highlighted by default anyways. Personally, I don't really care for optional difficulties like this, since it's often unclear which one the developers intended you to play. At least this game lets you change your difficulty upon loading your save file. Again, this game has tons of customization and room to experiment with its mechanics. A somewhat more pertinent nitpick I have is that the game can get somewhat repetitive as it goes on. Given that most missions boil down to fighting enemies, it can admittedly start to feel a little bit repetitious by the end. It's hard to get too tired of combat mechanics as good as this, and they do add some welcome mission variety to help with this, such as restricting you to your wrench or cycling through weapons, just like the arena battles from the previous 2 games, but at a certain point it can start to lose a bit of the luster. Thankfully, this is also the shortest game in this series yet, clocking in at only about 5 hours or so as soon as it starts to get a bit stale, the game is almost over. Not to mention, they pull out all the stops with the story by then, so it's basically impossible to lose interest in the game. The vehicle segments aren't my favorite though. I've never really cared for these much in the Ratchet series, and these are no exception. Most of them are functional, and I even find the parts using the hover bike to be pretty cool, but the other ones aren't that fun. The worst is easily the Landstalker, which is just clunky, stiff, and awkward to control. It's also involved in these stupid targeting missions, which just blow donkey balls. Thankfully, besides those, none of these vehicle missions are so bad that they'll completely stop your progress in its tracks, and the mandatory ones are often pretty simple or don't even force you to use the vehicle in question. My biggest criticism of Ratchet Deadlocked, however, is definitely the dread point system. It's how you unlock planets, and in essence it's a bunch of optional missions that really aren't optional. I have never liked when linear stage-based games force you to complete side missions or otherwise do things that would just be bonus content to progress. That's not to say I dislike most of the missions themselves, I just don't care for the principle of locking progression behind a somewhat arbitrary point system like this. It can make the game's pacing seem slower than it really is, and like the bootouts in Super Mario 64, the dread points are a thinly veiled way of extending the game's short length. I can hardly say this gets too much in the way of the fun though. The combat and mechanics on their own are fun enough that I can tolerate it for the sake of enjoying the game. Ratchet Deadlocked also has a fairly strong climax that wraps up the game very well. Yeah, maybe it doesn't have the same feeling of coming full circle as Ratchet 1, nor does it have the grand scale of Up Your Arsenal, but I'd say this climax was done better than Going Commandos at least. As Ratchet competes in the various tournaments and rises up the ranks, Al works on trying to break the deadlock collars that are on all 3 of them. He's eventually able to do so, but as soon as he does, this happens.
I know. No!
Looks like somebody broke the rules.
Yes, Ace Hardlight appears and actually seems to kill Big Al, one of the series' most iconic characters. After that, there is no room for jokes. We have a genuine moment where Ratchet swears to take down Ace and all the other higher-ups at Dread Zone, as well as free the other captive heroes. This plot really knows when to take itself seriously, just like the last games, and it's fitting given how deadly the stakes are in this one. Eventually, Ratchet makes his way to Ace and faces off against him once and for all. This battle is actually pretty cool. Involves an element similar to the Klungo fights from Banjo-Tooie, where Ace spawns a bunch of fakes and you have to to shoot the real one. It's probably one of the most creative boss fights in the game, which is cool because all the other ones are kind of lackluster, to be honest. Anyways, once Ratchet takes him out, Ace warns him of what's about to happen. Vox is planning to tempt Ratchet to sell out and become the new head of the Exterminators, a position that will invariably lead to nothing but everlasting misery. He doesn't want Ratchet to follow the same path he did. Literally in the next scene, Vox pulls the predictable move.
I'm about to offer you the opportunity of 1,000 lifetimes. I'm making you the new captain of the Exterminators, the star of the show. Think of it. We'll make billions. We'll sell Ratchet action figures, Ratchet sports shoes, Ratchet deodorant, Ratchet breakfast cereal, earmuffs and cologne, soft drinks, hard drinks, energy drinks, breath mints. You get record deals, movie rights, reality shows, video games, and commercials.
However, Ratchet isn't going to budge.
No deal, Vox.
What did you say?
I'm not your puppet, Vox. You actually think I'd kill other heroes to get rich? You're not just corrupt, you're stupid.
Why you...
Just like Clank did with Nefarious in the last game, Ratchet follows his morals and doesn't become Vox's advertising puppet. Early on in the game, Ratchet actually started to warm up to the idea of Dreadzone being a famous gladiator, but after going through what he did, he isn't about to fall for Vox's evil schemes. It's a real test of his character, and it shows just how great of a guy Ratchet really is at the end of the day. In response, Vox sends Ratchet to meet his fate on the deadly Ghost Station like the sore loser he is, a phantom outpost in the middle of ass-crack nowhere that hosts an intentionally impossible obstacle course. It was made to serve as a punishment for contestants, and Ratchet was sent there so Vox could at least profit off of his death. This level is awesome, as it has really challenging combat and route grinding sections as well as amazing music. Don't really care for the last mission though, it's a chore. Regardless, Team Darkstar manages to escape from the station and shut down the power, ensuring that it can never be used again. They return to the Dreadzone station and meet up with Clank again. While Ratchet was busy finding his way out of the gauntlet, Clank and Owl, the latter of which was given a cybernetic enhancements to heal his wounds, managed to acquire schematics for the Battle Dome and found that there was a control level that monitors power to all the containment fields. If they can take it out, the trio can free all the captive heroes and liberate the Shadow Sector from Dreadzone. They managed to hack a transport shuttle to take Ratchet there, which is a one-way trip since the shuttle detects it was tampered with and will deactivate after its use. So yeah, this is the first Ratchet game with a point of no return. At this point in the game though, you should be fairly decked out, so the fact that you can't go back isn't that intimidating. As soon as Ratchet arrives in the control level, it's revealed that Vox already found out about the team's plans. It has rigged the station to explode in the next 10 minutes. He markets it as the final episode of Dreadzone, using it as one last attempt to get ratings. Ratchet now has to act quickly to disable the containment fields and do battle with Vox once and for all. Thus begins the final level, and honestly, it's a bit underwhelming as the last stage, and oddly enough, for pretty similar reasons to Yeetle from Ratchet 2. It just feels like more of the same fighting enemies using Merc and Green to clear objectives, and doesn't have the same climactic feel as the Velden revisit from Ratchet 1, or the Control Center and Mylon from Ratchet 3. Though I do find the dialogue between Dallas and Juanita to be pretty funny, since they completely drop the whole announcer routine and lose their minds as they're about to die.
Since we're all about to perish horribly, I should own up to a few things. First of all, Timmy Aberdeen, I'm the one who set your backpack on fire. I'm sorry you couldn't get it off in time. And Susie Binkleton, I was the one who put the Tyrannoid in your locker. Hey, I heard the therapy is going well, though. Chin up, kid!
Anyways, Team Darkstar managed to disable all the containment fields, which allows all the fans and heroes to still trap within the Battle Dome to escape. Now all he has to do is face off against Vox, who isn't playing around anymore. He wants Ratchet dead and on live Holovision too. The final boss against Gleeman Vox is honestly pretty strong in its own right. I'd probably still rather fight Nefarious since he was a bit more challenging, but Vox still manages to be an enjoyable final boss. His attacks are fun to dodge, as you use the various weapons to return fire. After all the shit he put you through and all the heinous acts he's committed, he's quite possibly one of the most evil villains in the series' history. As such, it's incredibly satisfying to tear him to pieces and dismantle the dishonest media empire he's built by forcing innocent people to kill each other. Once Ratchet puts Vox out of commission, he initiates the destruction sequence of the station. He plans to die alongside Ratchet and get the best ratings he's ever had. Even in death, he still can't give up his obsession with the bottom line. Just before the station can explode though, Clank shows up on a shuttle and the two escape alongside everyone else left in the Battle Dome, including Vox's pet, leaving the bastard to die all alone. As the group flies away from the exploding Dreadzone station, Clank expresses worry that the other heroes were killed in the explosion, but they get several calls confirming that everyone was able to get out safely. In the end, Vox was the sole victim of his own vile handiwork, an incredibly fitting end for such a greedy dirtbag. I rather like this ending. While the story of Ratchet Deadlocked is simpler than the previous games, as I've said, it still features many great moments, and this ending is certainly one of them. It's so uplifting to know that all the characters were able to take down Dreadzone and leave Vox for dead by working as a team, and watching it all play out gives a similar level of satisfaction to the past game's endings. And really, that's all I have to say about Ratchet Deadlocked as a game. This review ended up being way shorter than my other Ratchet & Clank reviews, but that has nothing to do with this game being of poor quality or anything like that. As I feel I've argued by now, Ratchet Deadlocked is a fun game that offers plenty of value in its own right. Yes, the game is a lot shorter than the previous ones. Yes, it is somewhat different with the darker tone and full combat focus. No, it isn't a perfect game, as it has some padding, annoying vehicle sections, and can get repetitive after a while. However, none of these things even come close to dissuading me from thinking this game has a lot to offer on its own. It may not be my preference, or quite as good as Ratchet 2 or 3, but I still have a lot of fun whenever I replay it. It's a game I always come back to whenever I feel like revisiting this series. I think the story and writing are well done on their own. The presentation is the same high as its predecessors, even with the darker tone. The weapons are the most well balanced yet. The mod system is a great addition. The music is stellar. The art design is incredible. All in all, Deadlocked is a really good game. It does fall into the category of dumb fun, if that makes any sense, but dumb fun is still fun at its very core. If you haven't played it yet, it comes recommended, especially if you're already a fan of this series like me. You probably won't be blown away by it, but it's worth experiencing and remembering for just how well it executes its own vision and ideas. That's all I really got to say about this game. It was fun to be able to talk about it, just as it's been for all of these games up to this point. I've been praising this series as it's just really that good. It allowed Insomniac to rest easy after the loss of the Spyro series, and showed that they were going nowhere. These 4 games are some of the PS2's strongest. They dared to be ambitious with their groundbreaking presentation, deep combat systems, customization, epic plots, and more. They embody everything I love about video games in general. A developer or creator just taking their grand vision and executing it with gusto, expanding the lore, characters, universe, gameplay, aesthetics, and more with each entry. This series hasn't always been perfect, as I've laid out in these reviews, but no game is. In every area it matters, I find that these games succeed, and that is certainly something worth remembering. That is why it's one of my favorite series ever. We're not done yet though. There's still 2 more games left to cover, both of which were entries made by a completely different company for a handheld system. They were also ported to PS2, but as you may know, the circumstances regarding that are, shall we say, complicated. In the next video, I'll be talking about Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, released on the PlayStation Portable originally. I have barely played that game, so that review will be a bit different from the 4 I just did. I don't know exactly how it will turn out. I guess the only way to find out is by marching forward and doing it. Until then, I've been Diamond Miner Studios. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.
What's going on? You said we were coming within range of a space station!
Well, we were, sir. How was I to know it would suddenly explode?